Everyone, welcome to today's session, which we have titled Reclaiming Your Time. I've been really looking forward to presenting this one for a while. As this one is actually being presented, it is the start of a new calendar year, so what better time to be looking at a topic such as this. For those that don't know me, Chris East is my name, Director, Founder of East Partners Accountants here in Adelaide, and I'll be walking you through today's session. For those that have been on some of these sessions before, you'll know that I like to start with a thought for the day. Today we're saying either run the day or the day runs you, and it's pretty relevant for today's topic. And the irony certainly isn't lost on me that if you're here now, you've probably already reclaimed some of your time because you put time aside, obviously, to be here today. It's the people who aren't here that perhaps need to hear these messages even more. So from my perspective, well done for you for being here. And I appreciate you making the choice to spend some of your time with me here today. And I'll obviously my task now will be to endeavour to give you as much value as I can. Before we get stuck in, I want to throw to our usual disclaimer, which this is an educational webinar. It's general in nature and doesn't substitute for specific individual tailored advice. What are we going to talk about today? First, we're going to have a look at understanding why we'll always be busy. It's just a fact of life now. I think we just need to accept that we will always be busy. However, mindsets need to perhaps be recalibrated or changed in order for time to be reclaimed, which we'll then look at. We'll identify where time is being wasted, some practical ways to free up your time permanently, what you can potentially do with the time that you do free up, next steps, and then we'll look to wrap up. All right, so let's look at why we'll always be busy. Here's my top 5 reasons, if you like, why we'll always be busy. And these really come from my experience as a business owner and working with business owners like yourself for the best part of 25 years. First up, work expands to the time available, which essentially is saying that if you've got a bit of time, something will slip in and eat up that time. So we often pace our output to match the timeline we have. And for those of you that have staff, you'll know that they're pretty good at doing that too. So think about budgets or time allocated for jobs. When we have a budget or a time allocation, which can be arbitrary, but it does bring to focus how much time we have available for completion of that particular task. Secondly, the distractions that we have. We might find a job that needs finishing but lacks a clear deadline. So it sits waiting and we find ourselves procrastinating, picking up, putting down other seemingly urgent interruptions or just simply getting distracted. There's no shortage of distractions these days, particularly with social media and the like. Thirdly, our perceptions of busyness change, and essentially here it's all relative. So as an example, when we're all in high school, you probably remember that when we're in high school, we have an hour of homework per day, but trying to fit this in with our seemingly busy schedule as a teenager was often made us feel very busy. We then move on to university, and the university student experiences an increased workload. Although they can produce more, they probably won't feel necessarily any busier than they were at high school. When you then go and then join the workforce, the workload increases again, and yet we still feel busy. The fourth one, I think, is a little bit dangerous, isn't it? The perception that busy equals successful. Think about how we respond to people who ask us how we're going. Have you ever heard anyone in the last, say handful of years, maybe even longer, have you ever heard someone say, I'm bored, I'm struggling to fill in my day, I'm not sure what to do, No, we never hear that. We always hear people saying, I'm busy. Does that necessarily, though, transfer into being successful? We'll consider that as we go. And finally, being too busy is often an excuse. When we have more time, we don't necessarily do the things we want to achieve. So as an example, working on our business is so often put on the back burner. We're generally working in the business. And we say, oh, I don't have time to work on my business. I'm too busy. Likewise, we can put books aside to read and somehow never seem to get to them. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, a best-selling book by Stephen Covey. I think it's a terrific book. It's one that I've read several times, and it's one I do give out to clients on regular occasions. So I'd like to look quickly at some of the key premises that Stephen Covey came up with this principle. The first habit is to be proactive. So that is making a choice to improve your life through things that you can influence. The second is to begin with the end in mind. So the values that you have, or your values, are a framework for that decision making. You use them to set your goals, and then you focus on achieving them. The third is to put first things first. It's the first things first principle. So you set your priorities and focus on them to avoid wasting time on unimportant and non-urgent tasks. So these first 3 habits relate to managing and reclaiming your time. So we're only going to look at those 3 today. And as you can see from the slide, the other habits, thinking win-win, seeking first to understand, then be understood, synergizing and sharpening the saw. Now, these are topics for another day. All right, I've used this model a few times in presentations that I've done in the past, the Orbed model. I think it's an absolute ripper. And you may have even seen it on sessions other than the ones that I've run. Today, I want to link the Orbed model to the 7 habits we just looked at, and more specifically, the first habit, which was the being proactive, and the second habit, which is starting with the end in mind. So being proactive is about staying above the line and focusing on what you can control, not being a victim and saying there's nothing you can do about your lack of time that you have. As confronting as it may sound, you're choosing to be as busy as you are. And more specifically, you're choosing to do the things you're doing. Stephen Covey's second habit of highly effective people also ties into this Orbed model, and it's the habit of starting with the end in mind. It's thinking about how you'd like people to describe you at your funeral. That's a bit of a morbid sort of thought, isn't it? But you can start being that person now. So thinking about how do you want people to be describing you and reflecting on you. This also means staying above the line and staying firm on your time management so that you can therefore be that person. All right, so let's take a look at creating atomic habits. This is a book by James Clear I read a little while ago. It's an excellent book, and another one that I've shared with a few clients, and as a matter of fact, my wife, she thinks it's terrific as well. All right, so the second mindset, as I said, I want to share is atomic habits, which speaks directly to starting with the end in mind. And building identity-based habits will enable you to prioritize your time and achieve better results. And so by focusing on who you need to be, that is your identity, and choosing habits consistent with that identity, your desired outcomes will flow more freely. All right, so from a reclaiming your time perspective, let's focus on this identity. Say you want to be more proactive and focus on what you can control, but you find yourself being distracted at times. So imagine you've set time aside to complete some of your business plan actions. Then an email or a text message pops up on your computer or on your phone. And this is what we call a queue. You see that there's a message and you want to read it. Then you want that dopamine hit, and that's what's called the craving. So in this particular case, you open the email, which is then the response. You think to yourself, it's just a short email or text from a client or from a friend, and you know the answer that you need to respond with. So you quickly tap out the response. 10 minutes later, you send the reply, and there's the reward. And the reward is that you feel satisfied that you've responded to the email or the text message, and before you know it, you're on to the next email or the text, and so forth and so on, and then an hour's gone by. And that whole focus on the business plan implementation has gone out the window. So what do? We need to remove the queue and replace it with a different one. What if you had switched off your email or your phone notifications whilst working on that business plan? The queue could then be handwritten to-do list of your business plan actions created a day before or sometime in advance. So the queue has been changed, which will then lead to a different set of actions, responses, and rewards. So where is time being wasted? Again, some of you may have seen me present this before. You may have even seen it yourself elsewhere. This is what we call the achiever matrix, and this was also developed by Stephen Covey. And again, if you haven't read the book, I absolutely commend it to you. In a nutshell, this matrix reflects that we all live in a time-pressured world with multiple overlapping commitments. So urgency is no longer reserved for special occasions. So separating tasks into these 4 quadrants helps us to better manage a flood of responsibilities, do excellent work, maintain a positive frame of mind, and so forth. This one directly relates to the 3rd habit of highly effective people, which, as I said earlier, was putting first things first. So what do we do here? Well, really, we need to spend less time working in the urgent quadrants and more time working in quadrant 2, which is the quadrant of quality. This is where the planning, prevention, innovation takes place. This is where we'll improve our processes. It's where we'll be the most productive. It's also where we can prevent a number of things from becoming urgent or falling into that disruptive first quadrant, which is that of urgency, or what we'd also term as being the firefighting quadrant. We also need to assess what things that are not important from distracting us from working in the quadrant of quality. So what are the disruptions that we can eliminate, minimize? What strategies can we use to reclaim some of the time spent on non-important things? All right, so now let's have a look at the productivity pyramid. We're going to start looking at a few strategies around this whole concept. And what we're looking at here is essentially a series of steps where we look at saying we want to start, I guess, at the bottom first. This is where we're going to start with improvement. This is where we work on mastering your expertise or working better. Secondly, we want to look at increase. This is where you get more people to do what you're doing by delegating or outsourcing. Then we look at investing, where we look at perhaps investing in technology to scale your business. We can then invent, we can create our own systems or technology to create valuable IP or an app or whatever else it is in your particular industry that could help you stand out from the rest. And lastly, we can innovate, which in its simple form is working on things, on better things. So looking at this, where are we on this productivity pyramid? Could you free up some of your time by employing others or contracting out some of the work that's been undertaken on that second level, on that increased level? What systems and software solutions could you utilize to free up your time and increase your efficiency? Improved systemization not only frees up your time, but it also allows you to grow your business without increasing risk or workload on yourself. Are there other things you could be working on to derive a better return on your time investment? COVID has certainly forced many of us to think about how we can adapt, innovate, re-engineer or reinvent the work that we do. And this is something that we look at with clients, particularly new clients that come to us where they're experiencing particular challenges in their business. And we're happy to discuss how this productivity pyramid could work to your advantage. In like most cases, a fresh set of eyes looking over your unique situation can open up opportunities that may not have been seen there before. You know, we can get very close to things, but having someone else come in and look at them can give us a bit of clarity and think, oh yeah. All right, let's have a look at the second strategy, which is stop working with the wrong people. Oh my God, have we had these sorts of situations? So like it has on the chart here, let's try and avoid working with people who don't pay your invoices on time, treat your team poorly, they don't fit your core values, are unreliable. I'm sure we've all had these sorts of people in our businesses that just are absolute time wasters. Yes, we want to help our clients and our customers, but we also have to look at it and say, are we helping them to the detriment of others and maybe even ourselves? Maybe it's time to look at those and start saying we need to actually move them on so that they are not forcing us into that quadrant of urgency, or maybe even those other quadrants where we look to say we really need to minimize or eliminate these sorts of time wasters. All right, number 3 is running better meetings. Now, if you're in a business where you may not necessarily have these, you may well have been in environments previously where you've had, but certainly for businesses where meetings are involved, where these are done well, these can absolutely be a time saver. So whether these are a 10-minute toolbox meeting over coffee or muffins, or meetings with prospective customers, we need to ensure that they're efficient and valuable to everyone attending. Poorly planned meetings are consistently a top 10 time waster, whether in a small business environment or ranging through to large corporates. So here's the rules of the game in our view, which are needed for running effective meetings. Set a time limit and stick to it, as we have on the chart here. If it's a toolbox meeting, make sure it's no more than 10 minutes. If it's a monthly team meeting, set the meeting time for 45 minutes. Check the time as you go through the meeting and remind everyone of the time agreed if it looks like the meeting will drag on. Secondly, report prior to the meeting. So what are we saying here? Consider whether a weekly team member report could be useful, so you can see what your team has been working on, what challenges they've had, the support they may need, and what they have planned for the coming week. Doing this I am positive that this will increase your efficiency dramatically. We have a team member report each week, or a team member meeting each week. We have a report with that. We find that it works tremendously well to maintain a regular check-in and so that we stay on top of things. Thirdly, set a regular rhythm for team meetings. So as an example, a daily or weekly huddle of no more than 10 minutes. Having these meetings scheduled means your team will remain fully informed and you won't be repeating yourself to every team member. Goodness me, isn't that a time waster in itself? Likewise, if you're providing a forum for feedback through this, so you should get less interruptions during the day, so you can knock things off more or less in one hit. Make sure you have a clear purpose and agenda. So this makes sure that every meeting has a purpose and a predefined agenda. From that, it encourages attendees to prepare and minimises the risk that the meeting will go off on a tangent and soak up unnecessary time. If an item comes up that's not on the agenda, perhaps set it aside to deal with at another time. Make sure actions are agreed, and from that, avoid having lengthy discussions. So what do we mean by this? If you've received team member reports prior to the meeting, you have an agenda, then you should be able to make decisions quickly. If there needs to be a more detailed discussion, delegate it to the most appropriate people and set a separate meeting so you're not wasting everyone else's time. Recording your agreed actions from the meeting is absolutely essential. Make sure that covers off who, what, and by when. Again, we do this and we find that it works really well. For clients that we do quarterly coaching or regular catch-up engagements, this is exactly what happens. And finally, accountability. This is the check-in on the actions recorded from prior meetings. So making sure that time is allocated for follow-up so that those tasks get done. So with this in mind, how well do your meetings stack up? And what could you possibly do to improve the effectiveness of your meetings? All right, number 4, let's have a look at the 10 hats organisational review. Now, the fourth strategy around this is really focused on a separate workshop that we've run some time ago, back when we could do face-to-face things in larger environments. But essentially the 10 hats is an essential mindset for business structure, leadership and management. It clearly defines what roles in your business are operational versus those that are strategic. And it also helps to draw accountability lines to allow for better planning, better reporting, delegation, time management, as well as helping assess resourcing gaps. It's important to ensure a business is sustainable, scalable, and ultimately saleable. Try saying that quickly 10 times. All right, so the 10 hats, what's that mean? Well, it really reflects the 10 departments that exist in any business, big or small. Every department needs one leader, but remember that responsibility and doing are not necessarily the same. So the leader may delegate the work, but ultimately they have the final decision as the decision maker. So how many hats are you wearing in your business? And what hats should you consider removing to free up your capacity to work on some of the more important things? Doing a 10 hats organisational review will analyse the hats you're wearing as well as those that are perhaps not your natural strength or are being neglected. And from there, potentially you can look and say, which hats do I need to take off? Now, 10 hat organisation review strategy meetings are things that we do, and are certainly happy to have a conversation around how that may be relevant to you and your business. And that's essentially what I've just spoken about. All right, so let's look at strategy number 5. And this is where we look to delegate effectively. And there's many misconceptions around delegation. It's a skill that should really be mastered, and everyone needs to master this, whether it be in their business or personal life. Delegating is not flinging a task at someone and hoping they'll do it right. Effective delegation requires communication. It isn't abdication. We need to make sure that we just don't load someone up and then just hope for the best. All right, so first you must assess the task and delegate it to the right person, providing clear support as they learn how to complete this new task. It's essential that you communicate the parameters both verbally and in writing, whether that be an email or a written procedure. It's a really good idea to ask your team member to repeat back the task instructions to ensure nothing is lost in translation and set a clear deadline for completion. Articulating the project objectives will also help the team member further understand your expectations and, most importantly, set time aside to review the outcomes together, as it is unlikely that they'll get it right the first time. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. That's just, that can happen. So don't be surprised or offended with their fresh perspective. They'll find the most efficient way of achieving the desired outcome. And this is often a happy byproduct of delegation, along with improved trust, respect, communication, and productivity, which all lead to improved profit and happiness for you, your team, and your customers. Most people confuse delegation with abdication, as I said earlier. Abdication is where you set the team member up to fail, basically. Ultimately, that will end up damaging culture, communication, productivity, and so forth. So it's really the opposite of what you're wanting to set out to achieve. So if we look back on what we've spoken about, where we've looked at the 7 habits, we've looked at the all-bed model, we've looked at some strategies around what you can potentially implement around moving from that quadrant of urgency to the quadrant of quality. What will you do with the time that you end up creating? 5 things that we recommend you look at doing would be looking for or committing to teaching others to what you've learned. So sharing your knowledge, essentially. That's what leaders do. Part of it is to say, look, yes, I need to bring my team in a particular direction, but I also need to impart the skills, knowledge, training, and so forth to make sure that can happen. Spend time sharpening your sword. Now, this was the 7th habit that we briefly touched on back on the 7 habits model. What does that mean? Well, that means working on yourself, building your skills to be a better leader. We also want to make sure we're spending some time planning more effectively. And be more commercial. Well, what are we talking about there? We're actually thinking about what we're doing. So rather than just turning up each day waiting for whatever crisis that's about to happen, or maybe clearing off crises that were left off from yesterday, we're actually coming in and saying, right, we're going to be more strategic about what we're doing. We're actually going to be going through this in a little bit more of a systematic, planned manner. Creating better habits again. A little bit like sharpening your sword, working on yourself and improving your leadership skills. And of course, taking time for yourself, making sure that you are the best version of yourself that you can be. These are all things which I have worked through myself and continue to do. And things that we perhaps learn on our business journey, where in the early years, we're just so busy doing it. And then things grow, and then we're even busier doing it. And a lot of these things, they just don't even come onto the radar. It's then making the conscious decision to say, I've got to do something about this, and working through those strategies, as I've spoken about, does lead to these outcomes, which, as I said, are things which I've been able to experience for myself. So what about you then? What do you need to be doing first to make all of this happen? So what are some of the steps you can take? Firstly, let's have a look and say, assess where your time is currently being underutilized. Where do you really want to be, but you just can't seem to get there? This will help you become more conscious of your daily choices and will therefore impact your capacity. Secondly, get clear on the habits you wish to create, the ones you know that will improve your productivity and focus. Planning for sustainable improvement starts with you and the leaders in your business. So if you've heard the saying, the fish stinks from the head down, typically is in reference to a poor leader because everything is falling apart. And the primary reason is that the leadership of that particular business is either chronically lacking or absent. So not to say that you may be the problem, but what are the things that you perhaps need to be doing in terms of habit recalibration or formation to then be able to bring your team on the journey with you and allowing for that sustainable improvement. Thirdly, identify your 3 most important actions. I want you to be recording these, whether now or later. Think about the 3 most important things that you can be doing so that you can then start that journey for making that real change. Fourthly, focus on what you can do instead of worrying about what's out of your control. Very hard to do, I accept that, particularly now where we are bombarded externally through various media sources and so forth on all of this doom and gloom. We can't do anything about that. What are the things that you can do within your business, within your world? What are the things you can influence that can actually create or result in real change? And lastly, get support. We're here and we want to help. These are the sorts of things that we encounter with small business owners all the time, and we are absolutely happy to assist in what we can in these areas. So segueing into that, what can we potentially help with? As I said earlier, there's the 10 hats organisational review that we can potentially look at to say, where are you spending your time? Where do you want to be spending your time? How can we make that happen? From there, we can then say, how do you then stay on track? How can we remain accountable for what we're doing? If you look at it and say, oh, I wouldn't mind having a chat, or I wouldn't mind getting a copy of that achiever matrix you've referred to, please get in touch. Give the office a call, visit the website, book an appointment with us. That is complimentary for the first appointment for a conversation. We can have a chat about where you're at, where you'd like to be, what are some of the barriers, and what could be the next steps. So before we wrap up, I love this quote. I like the old Star Wars rather than the new ones. So this one certainly comes from the originals, if I can call them that. Try not, do or do not, there is no try. It is terrific. It's something that I've drummed into my kids when they'll say, yeah, I'll try and do better, Dad. No, you'll either do it or you won't. There is no try. So what are we saying here? Make a simple plan today. Define at least 3 actions, as I said before, that you'll take action on as a result of today's meetings. Write them down. Goodness me, there's no value in just keeping them in your head because there's no accountability. Write them down, stick them in a prominent spot. And it doesn't matter whether they're personal actions, actions to do with your business, doesn't really matter. Give them an owner and a completion date. Make it real. And remember, if you need our support, we're here to help. So I'd like to thank you for taking some time today to join us on this session. And as I said earlier, I know your time is valuable. You took proactive steps in putting time aside for today's session, so you're ahead of everyone else. We hope that we've given you plenty of ideas to ponder and some clear next steps for you and your business. Hope this has been of value. Please reach out if there's anything else we can do for you, and look forward to joining us on our next webinar session. Thanks, and we'll see you then.